Um, Maybe some of you are watching from some other time zone, and it might be evening over there, or it might be night. I don't know, but yes, thank you for that. Liberty says we're live, and so I will assume that people can hear me. And thank you so much, everyone, for being over here and for your time for this particular session. I will start off by introducing myself. My name is Asad Mian. I the question that I guess I ask of myself at times is, okay, who am I, and how do I introduce myself? It says meet the author for this particular session. Per the traditional metrics of writing or authorship, I'm not really a writer. I don't consider myself to be a writer from that perspective. I'm a doctor by profession. I work in the emergency room, my emergency department. I specifically work with the children, actually. So I'm a pediatric emergency room physician. Children who are injured or who are ill, they come to the emergency department. I I deal with those children. I manage them. I am also a researcher. I have my own research projects that I do at my university hospital. I happen to be an innovator as well, and that's something more recent that I've started doing. Um, Writing has been of a lot of interest to me. I mentioned to you earlier that I don't consider myself to be a writer, but I stumbled upon writing, the kind of writing that you see in this book, An Itinerant Observer. This is what this session is about. And so how did I stumble upon this kind of writing? Because as a clinical researcher, as a pediatrician, as an emergency room physician, I had been writing biomedical papers or academic kind of writing, and that was a long experience. It was almost like 15 years of doing that, and I stumbled upon a different genre of writing, and that was short stories. And as I talk more, as we delve into this session more, I'll hopefully be able to tell you more about what the inspiration was, and why I started delving into that other kind of writing. But you know, I other than who am I, and I've already given you somewhat of a spiel around, okay, what my profession is, and I'm still trying to explore as to what other things interest me, creativity wise or innovation wise, and where are more areas or fields to explore, again, creativity wise. And so before delving into any of those things further, I really do want to thank people. I want to thank. Uh, it's really been grateful for being given this opportunity to speak over here. So thank you, Liberty Books. But to get to this kind of writing, there is a lot of gratitude, gratitude for people, gratitude for environments, gratitude for things other than human beings that I've written about as well. So my short stories have delved into not only human beings or fellow human travelers, but also other kind of non-human travelers, as I call them, and plants and animals, for example, or environments or different kinds of sceneries. And so I'm really very grateful to be alive, in spite of everything that's ongoing, the chaos of the pandemic, and environmental issues or disasters, so on and so forth. So starting with the end in mind, so gratitude. And in case I haven't mentioned someone, I do apologize, but this is a generic gratitude for being alive. Let's get into An Itinerant Observer, and that's the book over here. I don't know how many people out there have managed to read this book. Maybe some of you have read the book, but who is an itinerant observer, or what is an itinerant observer? And I want to kind of just simplify this viewpoint. So what does it mean to be itinerant? What is an itinerary for So itinerant is really somebody who is in travel. An itinerant person is in travel, and you might have heard the word itinerary, and that's pretty much your schedule or your schedule of a journey, right? So that's where the word originates from. So an itinerant is a person who is in a journey. And another word that I love is peripatetic. Peripatetic is simply being in a journey as well. So when you're traveling, um, and when you're in a journey and you're observing, that's what I consider to be a person who's doing that. I consider that person to be an itinerant observer. And this book of short stories or narratives has really been a process of just being in travel and observing and then writing about those interactions or those experiences. Now, what's interesting about being itinerant is that it's not always about a journey outside of you. It's not a physical journey at all times. It could be an inner journey. It could be a journey into the past, for example, right? Something that might have happened to you in the past, and then you rethink or you reflect on it, and you tell yourself a story, and then you articulate that story further via writing, and so it becomes a short story for others to read and others to consume. And so I've kind of delved into this genre. I don't even know whether it really exists outside of this sphere of how I was thinking about it. But the journey that I'm alluding to is much more than just a physical journey. It's much more than just being on vacation, for example, or going to a really interesting place, or a retreat or something like that, or a beach resort. It's not about that. It's about journeying, and it could be a journey into time. It could be a journey in space as well. So it's a time and space continuum, or a time and space journey. So an itinerant observer, another way of looking at an itinerant observer, is really a time traveler or a journeyman or a journey woman. Let's not forget. So that was the first question, right? So who is an itinerant observer? Second, what is storytelling? I really enjoy this concept of storytelling, and a lot of people, and I'm so happy that so many people talk about storytelling, and you can be anyone, and you could be a storyteller. Really, from my perspective, I my profession is medicine or healthcare, and I consider myself to be a storyteller in healthcare. I I provide a platform at times for my patients so that I can actually amplify their voice through narratives. I obviously do clinical research, but that's a very different kind of quote unquote storytelling. So storytelling, like I said, you could be anyone and you could be indulging in storytelling. So what is storytelling? Simplistically, it's really telling a story. So in Urdu, we say kahani sunana, right? So kahani is a story or a narrative, and when you go through the process of telling that story, so you're storytelling. Now, once you delve into storytelling and you read into it, and then you experience it, and then you figure out, okay, what connects with people really well in terms of how you're telling your story, then you can refine that process as well. And that could be, it could be verbal storytelling, it could be written storytelling, through narration, like the book, as a case in point. Or it could be other art forms. It could be storytelling through music. It could be storytelling through drama or theater, movies, so on and so forth. And I also want to mention over here that storytelling has a very rich tradition in our own culture, in South Asian cultures, right? Because Dastangui is a great example. Storytelling circles, people sitting around a campfire, for example, and telling stories. So I think we have this very rich culture of storytelling, and we're really poised to kind of further that process, or perhaps teach our kids and the next generations as well newer ways, digital storytelling, for example, right? So we have access to great technology now, so on and so forth. Okay, so that was what storytelling is about, and how do we tell our story. So I went over various different ways of telling stories. And um, uh, another question is, what are the components of storytelling? And I really watered this concept down of the components of storytelling. So I see it as as having two components. So you really need the story, which is the narrative, and you need a person who can tell the story. So the narrator. Or the storyteller, and you can't really have one without the other. And I've said this before in other sessions as well, that and if you think about it, art forms or creativity, you have the creator and you have what's been created. So music, right? So you have the musician and you have the musical composition. You think about art, you have an artist and you have the drawing or the painting or the illustration. So similarly, in a storytelling thingy, so you have the narrator and you have the narrative. And which brings me to medicine, because I keep alluding to medicine because that's my professional home. And there's a field that's been evolving over the past, I would say, decade or over a decade, and it's called narrative medicine. And I've got really interested and excited in narrative medicine because that's storytelling in medicine. Just like you can't have healthcare or medicine without a doctor or a nurse and the patient, right? So there's that dynamic or that interaction between the person, the patient, and the healthcare professional, which could be a doctor or a nurse or someone else within the healthcare domain. So that interaction is very beautifully demonstrated through narrative medicine. And that field, I have delved into that for the past few years and developed that field further at my organization as well. And it's an amazing form of storytelling in medicine. And then you might ask the question, then why is there a need for storytelling in medicine? And I would say, why not? There are stories of patients that do not get heard. There are ways that you can build empathy among your students, among your professionals of healthcare, through these stories of medicine. And so I have become a very strong advocate for narrative medicine or storytelling in medicine, and helped amplify the voices of patients through that process. Now, narrative medicine works not just for patients, it also works for the healthcare professionals, whether they're doctors or nurses, because it gives us an opportunity to talk about our own frustrations, our own limitations that we feel, and our strengths as well. So it gives us a great platform to amplify our voices regarding the practice or profession of medicine. So we are advocating for patients, and we are advocating for ourselves as well. So there's empathy for ourselves as well through this process. So like I said, narrative medicine, if you're interested, you can always get in touch with me offline, or I'm happy to connect with other people. So which reminds me that one of the workshops that we did, this was a few years ago, and thank you, Liberty Books, because several years back we did a workshop at Liberty Books at their at the Barbecue Tonight bookstore, the one adjacent to Barbecue Tonight, and it was a great experience. There were about around 2,000 people, and it was a workshop for creative writing, but we added a component of narrative medicine to it. So it just kind of, I was just going down memory lane, and so the concept or the field of narrative medicine has been developed over here over the past few years, and there's a lot of more work that needs to be done. I also want to make a point over here about COVID-19, because with the pandemic, um, everybody has been affected or impacted. Whether you're within the healthcare field or outside of the healthcare field, doesn't matter. I think everybody has been impacted, and you don't even need to have a family member who was affected or yourself being affected by COVID-19. Regardless of that, whether you think about education, you think about obviously healthcare, you think about business, you think about the food industry, grocery shopping, anything and everything, pretty much, traveling, so on and so forth, right? So everyone's been impacted. So I believe that everyone has a story. Um, if not several around narrative around COVID-19. So narrative medicine can really give you an opportunity to actually tell your story. And so get in touch and we can talk more about it. So one more point I want to make. What is the take home? I know we're going to get into questions, and hopefully people have questions for me about the book as well. So the take-home message through this particular book, An Itinerant Observer, which is if I were to kind of summarize the genre of this book, it's short stories, but it's reflective writing. It's narration around experiences, personal experiences. Not all of them were real. Some were imagined, but or they could have been a combination of fiction and nonfiction. But that's the storyteller's prerogative. So what's the take-home message? That I really do believe that all humans have the potential to bear witness to the multiple ways in which love extraordinarily manifests itself in our very ordinary lives. So these stories are really about ordinary, mundane occurrences. But how can you kind of tell a story around this and make it interesting? And there's a learning component to it for yourself and for others as well. So it becomes a great teaching, learning kind of an opportunity as well. And I'm not saying you have to become didactic or academic around it, but it's how you tell your story. And ultimately, like I just mentioned, it's about love. It's about um, I don't want to sound kind of like soppy about this, or, loving your neighbor or something like that. But, ultimately it's about being kind. It's about being nice, just being nice. There's enough rudeness and enough violence and all of those kinds of things around us. So these stories will indicate to you that just being nice to people around you, to your environment, actually, not just to people, but also to your non-human fellow travelers, to the plants around you, to the animals around you, to birds, and so on and so forth, to your environment, right? To the great northern areas and to the great southern areas of the country as well, to the beaches, to the mountains, to the lakes and the rivers and so on and so forth, right? So those are just some very basic messages that I hope to also give out through these narratives. And that's it from my part. Just before we open this up to questions and comments, I would like to kind of read a few excerpts from this particular book. And I'm not going to read out the whole story or stories for you, because that might just bore you, and you might even I don't even know whether I don't know how many people are watching this. I can't see you, you can see me, but I don't really want to kind of bore you with these stories at this stage. I hope you like them. I will actually just kind of read some excerpts of a few of these stories, and then I'm hoping that you'll get the book from Liberty Books, and then get in touch and let me know what you think about these stories. Okay, this story is called Rosie. I won't tell you the details about Rosie, and I'm not going to read out the whole story for you, like I said. Okay. Supreme knowledge of the female came to me in, of all places in the world, San Antonio, Texas. It came at the most unexpected of moments, and it came in the form of Rosie. I was visiting friends for the Labor Day weekend with my son, Ray. It was an unusually pleasant morning, so my friend suggested we go for some outdoor activity. We picked on a riding camp in the hill country of San Antonio. I had never before ridden a horse, so it seemed like an activity worth attempting. I imagined a beautiful green flatland with acres and acres of wild grass, tall trees in the distance, and a backdrop of lush mountains as I rode Black Beauty to my heart's content. I visualized myself as a youthful Clint Eastwood in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, chewing on a cigar, eyes squinting in the bright sunlight. With the cool breeze blowing through my hair, I conjured up an image of myself sitting atop my majestic steed, reins in my masculine hands, looking out to the far horizon. That's it from this particular story. It's for you to guess who Rosie is. And for those of you who've read the story, do not be spoiled sports. Yeah, and so that was just the beginning of Rosie. And most of these stories are actually short stories, like I mentioned, and and just interactions and experiences, what I picked up from that, and could become useful experiences for others as well. Another excerpt. This story is called Avery. Avery is dead, Baba, my friend told me, said Noori, my 5-year-old, when I picked her up from school that day. I already knew since it was all over the news. Avery wasn't quite 6 months old, and I had recently been diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy, a neurogenetic disease with a devastating prognosis. That diagnosis and my being a pediatrician aside, I have to constantly remind myself that everything becomes recent when you are just 6 months old. Baby Avery, as she was fondly called, had become a household name after the blog written by her dad went viral. She is the only baby I have ever known with a bucket list. Several things were mentioned on that list: being able to sit up, kissing and hugging mommy and daddy, being able to get a tattoo, manicure and pedicure, and many more things. Given a diagnosis, the remarkable infant managed to achieve quite a few of the items listed, and in the process, she had won thousands of hearts the world over. Avery was very special for a number of reasons. I got to know the baby entirely through Noori and the baby's mother, who was a kindergarten teacher. No, the kindergarten teacher who taught Noori. She was the kind of teacher that I never had when I was Noori's age. So that was from the story called Avery, and just an excerpt. And you can read more about Avery from the book. And there's several other stories and excerpts I can read through, but I'm not too sure how we're doing on time, because I was told about 15-20 minutes, and I think so. Are there questions or comments we can take? Should I continue? Okay. Hi, Kesha. Glad to meet you too. Okay, so so there's a question from Muniba. How long does it take you to write a book? Okay, so great question, Muniba. Okay, so my experience. Okay, before I get into this particular book, I forgot to mention that I had started off my writing experience, other kind of writing experience, by writing for children, and that was an experience that I had gained while working with Book Group. Book Group is an organization based out of Karachi, and they have been writing books for children for almost, I would say, 20-25 years. And while I was in Houston, that was my other life, and I was living in the US. I started writing some stories for children because of support from Book Group, and that was my first experience of writing for children. And then those books got published. So, how long did it take me to write those books? I was working with some with a team actually of co-authors, and those were students from some students from the US, and then there was the editorial board of Book Group. So together it took us, I would say, several months, about half a year, to work on one story and to revise it and back and forth, and that was a team effort. And it took about, I would say, about half a year to kind of be happy with the finished product, i.e. that one particular story or storybook for children. And those are bilingual books that were published by Book Group, and I believe Liberty and some other bookstores in Pakistan have those books. But coming to this particular book, so Muniba, this book took me almost, I would say, about 2 years. It was about 2 years of kind of going back and forth between myself and the editor. The first time that this book was published was in the US, and I was still living in the US. And although the book got published 1 year after I'd moved back to Karachi, but the process of developing that book was while I was still in the US. And so writing the manuscript or writing the short stories and then reviewing them, and I had some friends, thank you friends for actually reviewing and editing my material, and then the editor of that particular publishing house in the US, who then did the main editing of the book. That whole process, I would say, so 2 years with the book itself, with the publisher. But prior to that, I would say the stories were in my head for several years. So in total, I would say a book of this nature could be, I don't know, it could be a lifelong process for some. And I think some of the stories in this particular book they were stuck in my head because I've gone back about 20 years at times, or about 20, 30 years. So then the question is, and does it take a lifetime for such a book? Perhaps yes, through that lens. It can be a very long time, or it can be a very short time if you think about the actual publication aspect of things. So I hope that answers the question. So Zora is asking, as a doctor and writer, what coping techniques you will suggest to people suffering any mental illness? And that's such a fabulous question. Thank you so much, Zora, for that question. So, Zora, so even if somebody is not suffering from a mental illness per se. I mean, if it hasn't been diagnosed, it doesn't even have to be a mental illness. It could just be people who are just going through day-to-day stressors, for example, right? So writing, I think, can become such a therapeutic thing. So writing as therapy, or writing therapy, we promote this kind of therapy for our patients, regardless of having any mental illness. So I would say, so writing. Okay, so right. So coping techniques for people suffering from mental illness. So coping could be through writing. Okay, whether it's mental illness or outside of that. Coping techniques of the kind that the avenues that open up when you start reflecting on things, right? So so writing, music, art, drama, and dance therapy, so on and so forth. So all of these techniques could be very good coping techniques for people who are suffering from mental illnesses, um, and writing specifically, I would highly recommend, because personally, there have been times, situations where, because of the nature of my work, I work as an ER physician, and it's a busy ER. There are times when you're dealing with things that are of a very difficult nature, and without giving away patient confidentiality, obviously, but there are ways that you can put together narratives or your experiences or your encounters that through writing, that it really helps you cope. So the stressors of your day-to-day work, and writing, maintaining a diary of some kind. So that kind of writing experience, I think, can be very therapeutic and can really help you cope. I hope that kind of like answers this question. So Sheroz is asking, what was one of the most surprising things you learned in creating your books? Okay, so a great question. Thank you, Sheroz. So if I think about the children's book, the Belungra series that I've worked on in the past, those are bilingual books, and those stories, they were like about 5 or 6 different storylines, and those things, the surprising thing, or things, when I was creating those children's books, was that when you're writing stories for children, you've got to put yourself in the children's shoes. Okay, so what that means is that's empathy. First of all, you've got to understand, okay, what are the frustrations, or what are the painful pain points for the people that you're working for, whether it's in healthcare or as a writer. And in this case, because I was writing for children, I had to put myself in the children's shoes, and then imagine, okay, what kind of things would really interest them, what would get them interested, what would get them excited. And the other thing was really interesting to me was, and this was something I learned from book group, was that when you write a story for a child, then you should have it reviewed by a child, or children for that matter. Don't become your own don't become too much of a critic of your own material, and certainly you can share the manuscript with other adults to give you feedback, but certainly run it by children, because they're the ones who'll be apparently they'll be the ones who'll be reading those books, right? So those stories. So that was a really surprising thing to me when I started working on writing those stories for children. For the stories that I've written for the older age group, whether that's older children, for example, teenagers and adolescents, or young adults or adults. One of the surprising things that I've realized in creating these kinds of books or these short stories is that nothing could be not worth contemplating on or reflecting on or potentially writing about. Obviously, you've got to be very honest with, be okay about sharing that particular narrative or story with the world out there. Right? That goes without saying, because you owe yourself a bit of honesty for sure, because you've got to be true to yourself when you're writing, and when you're doing reflective writing, I should say, and then you should be okay with sharing it with the world as well. So that was somewhat of a learning experience for me. I don't know whether it was surprising to that extent, but I think it was a learning curve or a learning experience for me. And what was surprising was that these stories really connected with people. Not everyone. There were critics out there as well, and there were people who probably didn't want to read anything that I was putting out there through my blog or through the community blog that I manage or the personal blog. And then I've written for newspapers as well, both in the US as well as in Pakistan. So not everybody is going to be your uh, uh, क्या कहते हैं, not everybody is going to be encouraging you, not everybody is going to be discouraging you. You've got to decide, who are you really doing this for? Is it for public consumption? Is that the reason for you to write stories and publish them in books and so on and so forth? Is that your objective, or is it really because you enjoy the process? You're learning about yourself. It's an inner journey, and hence you will keep doing these things. So that was a surprising and a somewhat of an eye opener for me as well. That years and years of doing this, that I have to be quite comfortable in my skin. I've got to be very thick-skinned as well. That ultimately I am doing this for myself. I am reflecting and writing for myself. Really, does it matter to me whether 5 people read it, nobody reads it, or 100,000 people read it? Not really. It's ultimately what will sustain me or what will sustain my writing is writing for myself. But that's what I believe in. That ultimately it's delving into my own self, and it's seeking truth, and bearing witness to what you're seeing around you. But a great question, and I think we could have a very interesting, somewhat of a philosophical discussion around it. But thank you for the question. Anything else? Okay, so Lalen is asking, do you have any suggestions for people who look forward to becoming writers? Yes, great question. Great thing to delve into. So I think some of those points I've just made within the previous question. You've got to be thick-skinned. So if you're thinking about becoming a writer, remember at the get-go, Lalen, that even I said when I talked about myself that I don't consider myself to be a writer. I at times don't want to label myself. It could be a bit of just lack of comfort with calling myself a writer, because I think, I mean, there are better and greater and very wise writers out there. I mean, I look up to people the people within our own culture who've written great, fabulous books, and there are people outside of that culture as well. But those are real writers, I believe. If you are doing this because you want to, you enjoy the process, so being thick-skinned, so that so you keep up with the process. You understand, you reach out to some people that could be your safety net perhaps, or your interest group, or consider them your friends, who can give you very good feedback. And it doesn't have to be always positive. It has to be critical feedback, so that they give you both the pros and cons, or what's good about the material, and where there is room for improvement, because you've got to get feedback that's reliable, and that helps you keep improving. And so I think that will sustain you as well, because if you constantly your target or your goal is to improve your writing, I think that becomes really important. And then you put together your material. I think having a blog is a great idea, because I've done that. As long as your objective is not always number of likes or number of reads. For some people it becomes a very important metric, but I think if you're in it for the long haul, then the number of likes or the number of reads should not always be your metric. Yes, perhaps there are some times when you want to have more people reading and more people giving you feedback or more comments on your blog. At other times, you probably won't have all that many people, and it takes time and effort to actually do the publicizing and building up of your blog and building up of your readership as well. So time and effort, you have to put in time and effort, and a routine helps. And so putting aside time to reflect on this, and reflect on and putting aside time so you can write, and then build your writing skill set that way. So all of those things help. So all of those would be suggestions. Ultimately, like I keep saying, and I'm repeating, if you want to do this and you want to do this for the long haul, then do it for yourself. I was told that this is going to be the last question. So yeah, thank you so much, Liberty. Thank you everyone for joining. And if you want to reach out to me, I'll be very happy to give you some more feedback, input. And if Liberty wants to host another workshop, we can do that actually, and we can even reach out to other people who want to become participants in that kind of and we can do this virtually as well. So very happy to do that. Thank you everyone, and have a great day, evening or night, wherever you are. Bye.